The morning sun had barely risen over Buckingham Palace when Queen Camilla made an unexpected decision. She stood in her private chambers, surrounded by several leather suitcases that her staff had hastily packed during the night. Her face showed determination mixed with something else that her lady-in-waiting couldn't quite identify. Perhaps it was fear, or maybe regret. The Queen had announced just hours earlier that she would be traveling to her countryside estate in Wiltshire. This wouldn't normally raise any concerns, but the timing seemed odd to everyone in the palace. There had been growing tensions within the royal family over the past few weeks, though the public knew nothing about it. Whispered conversations in hallways stopped abruptly when others approached. Staff members exchanged worried glances but said nothing aloud. Camilla's assistant, Margaret, had worked for the royal family for nearly 20 years. She had seen many unusual situations, but something about this morning felt different. The Queen had given very specific instructions about what should be packed, and she insisted on leaving immediately without following the usual protocols. There would be no advanced security team sent ahead, no official announcement, and most strangely, she wanted to leave through a side entrance rather than the main gates. As the morning progressed, palace security became aware of the Queen's plans. Captain James Morrison, head of the Royal Protection Unit, received an urgent call from his supervisor. He was a tall man in his late 40s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He had protected members of the royal family for 15 years and took his duty seriously. When he heard about the Queen's sudden departure, alarm bells went off in his mind. Morrison quickly made his way to the east wing where the Queen's chambers were located. His boots echoed against the marble floors as he walked with purpose through the ornate corridors. Portraits of past monarchs looked down at him from gilded frames as he passed. He had a responsibility that went beyond simple security. There were protocols in place for very specific reasons, and departures by senior royals required proper screening and authorization. When he arrived at the Queen's suite, several staff members were carrying luggage toward a private staircase. Morrison stopped them politely, but firmly. His presence commanded immediate attention, and the porters set down the bags without question. Margaret appeared from the doorway, looking flustered. "Captain Morrison, Her Majesty wishes to depart within the hour," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "Everything has been prepared according to her instructions." Morrison nodded respectfully but stood his ground. "I understand, but I'm afraid I need to conduct a standard security screening before any luggage leaves the premises. These are the protocols, and they apply to everyone without exception." His face paled slightly. She glanced back toward the Queen's chambers, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The Queen was very specific about maintaining privacy during this departure. "Perhaps we could arrange the screening after arrival at the estate." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Morrison replied calmly. "Security protocols must be followed before departure, not after. It's for Her Majesty's own protection as much as anything else. I'll need to inspect all luggage before it can be transported." The conversation had grown slightly heated, though both remained professional. Other staff members had gathered at a respectful distance, sensing that something unusual was happening. Word began to spread through the palace that there was a situation developing in the East Wing. Morrison requested that all luggage be brought to a private security room adjacent to the Queen's chambers. It was a small but well-equipped space used for routine security checks. Margaret reluctantly agreed and instructed the porters to redirect the bags to that location. There were 7 pieces of luggage in total, ranging from large suitcases to smaller carry bags. As the luggage was being moved, Queen Camilla herself emerged from her chambers. She wore an elegant cream-colored coat over a simple dress, clearly dressed for travel. Her expression hardened when she saw Captain Morrison standing in the hallway. For a moment, an uncomfortable silence hung in the air. "Captain Morrison, I was told you are delaying my departure," she said coolly. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Morrison bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, I apologize for any inconvenience, but I must conduct a routine security screening of your luggage. It's standard protocol for all departures." Camilla's jaw tightened slightly. "I can assure you that everything in my possession has been properly packed by trusted staff. There is no need for this inspection." "I understand, Your Majesty, but the protocols exist for important security reasons." They apply universally to protect both the royal family and the integrity of palace security. I hope you can appreciate that I'm simply doing my duty." The queen stared at him for a long moment. Those nearby could feel the tension crackling in the air, like electricity before a storm. Staff members kept their eyes downcast, not wanting to be caught watching this confrontation between the queen and the security captain. Finally, Camilla spoke again, her tone carefully controlled. "Very well, Captain. Conduct your inspection, but I expect this to be done quickly and with discretion. I have important matters to attend to." Morrison bowed again. "Of course, Your Majesty. I'll be as efficient as possible." As the Queen returned to her chambers, Morrison made his way to the security room where the luggage had been assembled. He brought with him 2 other trusted security officers who would assist with the inspection. The room had proper scanning equipment and examination tables used for these purposes. Morrison began with the largest suitcase. He opened it carefully and methodically examined the contents. There were clothes, shoes, toiletries, and various personal items that one would expect for an extended stay in the countryside. Everything seemed normal at first glance. He moved through each item carefully, checking pockets, linings, and hidden compartments that expensive luggage sometimes contained. The second and third bags revealed similar contents: more clothing, some books, personal documents, and accessories. Morrison maintained his professional demeanor, though part of him wondered if perhaps this had been an overreaction. Maybe the Queen simply wanted privacy for a personal retreat. However, when he opened the 4th piece of luggage, something caught his attention. It was a medium-sized leather bag, exquisitely crafted with a royal insignia embossed on the side. Inside were several layers of clothing, but underneath, wrapped in silk fabric, was something that made Morrison pause. He carefully unwrapped the silk to reveal an ornate wooden box, approximately 12 inches long and 8 inches wide. The box itself was beautiful, made of dark mahogany with intricate gold inlay work depicting scenes from British history. It was clearly very old and very valuable. But it was what the box might contain that concerned Morrison. He examined the box carefully from all angles. There was a small lock on the front, and the box felt surprisingly heavy for its size. Morrison's instincts, honed by years of security work, told him this required further investigation. He made a decision that he knew might have serious consequences. Morrison called for Margaret to return to the security room. When she arrived, he showed her the box. "Can you tell me what this contains?" he asked directly. Margaret's face went white. Her hands began to tremble slightly. I don't know, Captain. I wasn't aware that box was being packed. The Queen supervised some of the packing herself privately." Morrison nodded slowly. This confirmed his suspicions that something unusual was happening. "I need to open this box. Do you have a key?" "I don't have any key," Margaret replied quickly. "And I must advise you that opening the Queen's private belongings without her explicit permission could be considered a serious breach of protocol. Not conducting a thorough security inspection would be an even more serious breach." Morrison countered, "These protocols exist to protect everyone, including Her Majesty. I need to know what's in this box before it leaves the palace." Margaret looked torn between her loyalty to the Queen and her understanding that Morrison was following proper procedures. Finally, she said quietly, "I'll inform Her Majesty that you're requesting permission to open the box." She left the room quickly, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. Morrison waited, the ornate box sitting on the examination table before him. His 2 fellow officers stood silently, understanding the gravity of the situation. Whatever happened next would likely have significant repercussions. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, Margaret returned, followed by Queen Camilla herself. The Queen's face was carefully composed, but those who knew her well could see the tension in her posture. She looked at the box on the table, then at Captain Morrison. "Captain, that box contains personal items of great sentimental value to me," she said firmly. "Family heirlooms and private documents. There is absolutely no security concern, and I must insist that you respect my privacy." 8. Morrison met her gaze steadily. "Your Majesty, I have the utmost respect for your privacy. However, I cannot allow any item to leave the palace without proper inspection. These rules have no exceptions. If you could simply show me the contents to verify there are no security concerns, we can resolve this quickly." The Queen's expression hardened. "I am not accustomed to having my word questioned, Captain Morrison. And I am not questioning your word, Your Majesty. I am following the security protocols that protect this institution and everyone in it. I have a duty that I cannot compromise, regardless of the circumstances." The standoff continued for several long moments. Other staff members who had gathered outside the room held their breath, wondering how this unprecedented situation would resolve itself. Never in recent memory had a senior royal been challenged so directly by security personnel. Finally, Queen Camilla made a decision that surprised everyone in the room. She reached into her coat pocket and produced a small golden key. Without saying a word, she stepped forward and inserted the key into the ornate box's lock. The mechanism clicked softly, and she lifted the lid. Inside the box, nestled in red velvet lining, were several items that made Captain Morrison's eyes widen. There were stacks of old letters tied with faded ribbon, some photographs that appeared to be quite old, and most notably, several pieces of jewelry that Morrison immediately recognized as part of the crown jewels collection. These were not replicas or personal items. These were authentic pieces from the royal collection that belonged to the state, not to any individual. Among the jewelry was a diamond and sapphire necklace that had belonged to Queen Victoria, a pair of emerald earrings from the Georgian era, and an antique brooch that had been worn by Queen Elizabeth during her coronation. The combined value of these items was astronomical, but more importantly, they were part of Britain's national heritage. They were never supposed to leave the palace, except under the most controlled circumstances. With proper documentation and security measures, Morrison felt his heart sink as he realized the full scope of what he was dealing with. This wasn't simply a matter of protocol anymore. This was potentially the unauthorized removal of state property. He looked at Queen Camilla, trying to keep his expression neutral, despite the shock he felt. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "these items are part of the crown jewels collection. They require special authorization and documentation for any movement, even within palace grounds. I'm certain you're aware of the protocols regarding these treasures." Camilla's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. "Those items have been in my personal possession for some time. I have every right to keep them secure at my country estate during this difficult period." Morrison shook his head slightly. "I'm afraid that's not accurate, Your Majesty. These pieces are property of the crown, held in trust for the nation. They cannot be removed from the designated secure locations without proper authorization from the Lord Chamberlain and the Master of the Jewel House. Even members of the royal family cannot take them without following procedures." Margaret stood frozen near the doorway, her face a mixture of shock and distress. She had clearly not known about the jewelry hidden in the box. The other security officers exchanged glances, but remained silent. Waiting for their captain's direction, the Queen's carefully maintained composure began to crack. "Captain Morrison, you are overstepping your authority. I am the Queen Consort, and I will not be treated like a common thief in my own home."
"Your Majesty, no one is making such an accusation,"
Morrison replied as diplomatically as possible. "However, I have a legal obligation to ensure that all palace property, especially items of national significance, are properly accounted for and secured. I must report this situation to my superiors immediately." Camilla's eyes flashed with anger and something else, perhaps desperation. "If you report this, it will create a scandal that could damage the monarchy. Is that really what you want? To harm the institution you've sworn to protect?" Morrison felt the weight of her words, but he knew his duty was clear. "My oath is to protect the crown and uphold the law, Your Majesty. That sometimes means making difficult decisions. I cannot and will not cover up the unauthorized movement of crown property, regardless of who is involved." The tension in the room was almost unbearable. For several long moments, no one moved or spoke. Then Camilla did something that shocked everyone present. She sank into a nearby chair, and tears began to stream down her face. The regal mask she had worn throughout the confrontation finally shattered. You don't understand, she said, her voice breaking. I wasn't stealing them. I was trying to protect them. There are things happening in this family that you don't know about. Threats that have been made. I thought if I could secure these items elsewhere, they would be safe. Morrison's expression softened slightly, but he remained firm. If there are genuine security threats, Your Majesty, and the proper authorities need to be informed through official channels. Taking matters into your own hands, especially involving Crown property, is not the solution. Margaret finally found her voice. Your Majesty, what threats? Why didn't you tell anyone? We could have helped through proper channels. Camilla looked up at her longtime assistant with red-rimmed eyes. You wouldn't understand. The pressure, the expectations, the constant scrutiny. And now there are people who want to see me removed from my position. They've been gathering evidence, looking for any mistake I've made. I thought if I could just get away for a while, take these precious items somewhere safe, I could figure out what to do. Morrison listened to her words carefully. He was trained to detect deception, and while the Queen was clearly emotional, he couldn't tell if she was being completely truthful. Were there really threats? Or was this a rationalization for taking valuable items that didn't belong to her? Your Majesty, if there are legitimate threats against you or against Crown property, we need to investigate through proper security channels, Morrison said firmly but kindly. But I cannot allow these items to leave the palace under any circumstances. They must be returned immediately to the jewel house, and this incident must be reported. Camilla stood up abruptly, wiping her tears. If you report this, you'll destroy me. The press will have a field day. They already criticize everything I do. This will be the scandal that forces me out of public life entirely. Morrison felt genuine sympathy for her distress, but he couldn't let it cloud his judgment. I understand your concern, Your Majesty, but the law applies to everyone equally. I have no choice in this matter. At that moment, there was a commotion outside the security room. Voices could be heard approaching rapidly. The door opened, and several senior palace officials entered, including Sir Reginald Beaumont, the Lord Chamberlain, and Lady Patricia Ashworth, the Queen's private secretary. They had clearly been summoned urgently. Sir Reginald was a distinguished gentleman in his 60s. With white hair and a stern demeanor, he took in the scene quickly, his experienced eyes moving from the distraught Queen to the open box of jewelry on the examination table. His face darkened with understanding. Captain Morrison, please brief me on the situation, he commanded, in a voice that brooked no argument. Morrison gave a concise but thorough account of what had transpired. From stopping the Queen's departure to discovering the crown jewels hidden in her luggage. As he spoke, Sir Reginald's expression grew increasingly grave. Lady Patricia looked horrified, her hand covering her mouth as she absorbed the implications. When Morrison finished his report, Sir Reginald turned to Queen Camilla. His voice, though respectful of her position, was firm and serious. Your Majesty, I must ask you directly. Were you aware that removing these items from their designated secure location without authorization constitutes a serious breach of protocol and potentially a criminal offense? Camilla straightened her posture, trying to recover some of her dignity. Sir Reginald, I was acting to protect royal property during what I perceived as a threat. My intentions were honorable, even if my methods were irregular. Irregular? Sir Reginald repeated, his eyebrows rising. Your Majesty, this goes far beyond irregular. These are priceless national treasures. Their security is governed by law, not by personal discretion. I'm afraid this matter is extremely serious. Lady Patricia stepped forward hesitantly. Your Majesty, you mentioned threats. Can you be more specific? If there are genuine security concerns, we need to know about them immediately. Camilla hesitated, and in that hesitation, Morrison saw something that troubled him. She seemed to be struggling to provide details, as if the threats she had mentioned earlier might not be as concrete as she had implied. There have been, whispers Camilla said vaguely, people questioning my position, my right to certain privileges. I've felt increasingly unwelcome and thought it best to secure valuable items before they could be taken from me. Sir Reginald exchanged a glance with Lady Patricia. It was clear to everyone in the room that the Queen's explanation was weak and unconvincing. The threats she described sounded more like personal insecurities than genuine security concerns. "Your Majesty," Sir Reginald said gravely, "I'm afraid I must take custody of these items immediately and arrange for their return to the jewel house. Additionally, I will need to convene an emergency meeting of the senior household to determine how to proceed with this matter." Camilla's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You're treating me like a criminal. I am the Queen Consort. I demand to be treated with the respect my position deserves." "And you will be treated with all appropriate respect," Sir Reginald replied calmly. "However, respect for position does not exempt anyone from accountability, especially when it involves property belonging to the nation." Captain Morrison acted correctly in stopping this unauthorized removal, and we must now follow proper procedures to address what has occurred. Morrison watched as palace officials carefully packed the jewelry back into the ornate box. He felt no satisfaction in having been right to investigate. This situation had escalated far beyond a simple security check into a full-blown crisis that could have serious repercussions for the monarchy. Margaret approached the Queen quietly. "Your Majesty, perhaps you should return to your chambers while these matters are sorted out. I can bring you tea and anything else you need." But Camilla shook her head firmly. "No, I won't hide in my rooms like a child being punished. If there's to be a meeting about my actions, I will be present to defend myself." Sir Reginald nodded reluctantly. "Very well, Your Majesty. We'll convene in the Blue Drawing Room in 1 hour. All relevant parties will attend." As the officials began to file out of the security room, Morrison remained behind for a moment. He looked at the now empty examination table and thought about the chain of events that had unfolded that morning. He had simply been doing his job, following the protocols he had sworn to uphold. Yet somehow he had become central to a crisis that could shake the royal household. The Blue Drawing Room was one of the most elegant spaces in Buckingham Palace. With its ornate ceiling, priceless paintings, and furniture that had witnessed centuries of royal history. But on this morning, the room's beauty was lost on those who gathered there. The atmosphere was heavy with tension and unspoken accusations. Queen Camilla sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, her posture rigid and her expression carefully neutral. She had changed into a more formal dress and composed herself, though those who looked closely could see the slight tremor in her hands. Lady Patricia stood near her, providing moral support even as she grappled with her own shock at the morning's events. Sir Reginald Beaumont sat at the head of a long mahogany table, with several other senior officials arranged around it. There was Lord Hamilton, the master of the jewel house. His face was grave as he contemplated the breach in security protocols. Dame Elizabeth Crawford, the keeper of the privy purse, had been summoned to assess any financial implications. Captain Morrison stood near the door, present as the officer who had discovered the situation, but trying to remain as unobtrusive as possible. "Sir." Reginald cleared his throat and began the meeting. "We are here to address a matter of utmost seriousness. This morning, Captain Morrison, following standard security protocols, discovered items from the Crown Jewels collection and luggage being prepared for Her Majesty's departure to her country estate. These items were being transported without proper authorization or documentation." Lord Hamilton leaned forward, his voice tight with concern. "The pieces in question are the Victoria diamond and sapphire necklace, the Georgian emerald earrings, and the coronation brooch. These are among our most historically significant items. Their value is incalculable, both monetarily and culturally. The security protocols surrounding them exist for very good reasons." Camilla spoke up, her voice controlled but with an edge of defiance. "I was not stealing them. They were temporarily in my possession for safekeeping. I had every intention of ensuring their security."
"Your Majesty,"
Dame Elizabeth interjected gently, "the issue is not one of theft or intent to steal. The concern is that proper protocols were not followed. These items require specific documentation, security measures, and authorization before they can be moved anywhere, even within palace grounds. The procedures exist to protect the items and to maintain a clear chain of custody." "I am the Queen Consort," Camilla replied sharply. "These treasures are part of my position. Surely I have some discretion regarding their use and location." Sir Reginald shook his head firmly. I'm afraid that's not correct, Your Majesty. The crown jewels belong to the crown as an institution, not to any individual, regardless of their position. They are held in trust for the nation. Even His Majesty the King cannot simply take pieces without following proper procedures. This has been established law and protocol for generations, Lord Hamilton added. When pieces are removed for official functions, there is extensive documentation, security planning, and insurance arrangements. Multiple people must sign off on the movement. What occurred this morning bypassed all of those safeguards entirely. Morrison watched the exchange carefully. He could see the Queen struggling between defensiveness and the dawning realization of how serious her actions had been. He almost felt sorry for her, despite the difficult position she had put everyone in. Lady Patricia spoke up hesitantly. Your Majesty, you mentioned earlier that you were concerned about threats. Can you provide more details? If there are genuine security issues, we need to address them properly. Camilla looked uncomfortable. She glanced around the room at the serious faces watching her, waiting for an explanation. There have been tensions within the family, she began slowly. Disagreements about my role, my influence. I've heard whispers that some people think I shouldn't have access to certain privileges. I was concerned that if relationships deteriorated further, I might lose access to items that have been entrusted to me. Sir Reginald's expression softened slightly, showing some understanding of the pressures the Queen faced. Your Majesty, family tensions are regrettable, but they do not justify circumventing established security protocols. If you had concerns about your access to royal property, the appropriate response would have been to discuss those concerns with the Lord Chamberlain's office or with His Majesty directly. The King is traveling, Camilla pointed out. He's been away dealing with Commonwealth matters. I couldn't reach him about this. Then you should have waited until you could, Dame Elizabeth said firmly, but not unkindly. Or you should have brought your concerns to those of us who are here to assist and advise. Taking matters into your own hands, especially involving property of such significance, was not appropriate. Morrison could see the Queen's composure beginning to crack again. The weight of what she had done and the potential consequences seemed to be settling on her shoulders. He found himself in the unusual position of feeling sympathy for someone whose actions he had been compelled to stop. Lord Hamilton continued, his tone serious. I must also raise the question of how these items came to be in Your Majesty's personal chambers in the first place. The Jewel House has strict sign-out procedures. Every item that leaves the secure vaults must be logged with specific dates for return. I've checked our records, and there is no documentation showing these pieces were properly signed out. The room fell silent at this revelation. This suggested the problem went deeper than just the attempted unauthorized departure. It meant the items had been removed from the Jewel House at some earlier point without proper procedures being followed. Camilla's face paled. I requested them for private viewing several weeks ago. I wanted to become more familiar with the collection, to understand the history of each piece. I was told they could be brought to my chambers for that purpose. Who told you that? Lord Hamilton asked directly. One of the Jewel House staff. I don't recall his name. A younger man, very helpful and knowledgeable about the collection. Lord Hamilton's jaw tightened. Your Majesty, no member of my staff has the authority to remove items from the secure vault and deliver them to private chambers without my explicit written authorization. If what you're describing actually occurred, then we have a serious breach of protocol by a staff member as well. Sir Reginald made a note on the paper before him. Lord Hamilton, I'll need you to investigate that immediately. We need to determine exactly how these items left the Jewel House and who was responsible. I'll begin inquiries this afternoon, Lord Hamilton confirmed. Though he looked deeply troubled by the implications, Dame Elizabeth raised another point. There's also the matter of insurance and liability. When Crown property is moved without proper documentation and security measures, the insurance coverage becomes void. If anything had happened to these items during transport, if they had been lost or stolen, the financial and historical loss would have been catastrophic. Camilla closed her eyes briefly, as if the full weight of her actions was finally sinking in. I never intended to cause harm or put anything at risk. I simply wanted to ensure that items I felt connected to would remain safe during an uncertain time. your feelings of connection. While understandable, do not grant you ownership or the right to make unilateral decisions about national treasures, Sir Reginald said firmly. This is precisely why we have protocols and procedures. They prevent well-meaning but misguided actions from creating serious problems. Lady Patricia placed a supportive hand on the Queen's shoulder. Your Majesty, I think everyone understands that your intentions were not malicious. However, the impact of actions matters as much as intent. We need to find a way forward that addresses what has occurred while minimizing damage to the institution. Morrison spoke up, for the first time since the meeting began, his voice respectful but clear. If I may, Sir Reginald? From a security perspective, we need to conduct a comprehensive audit of all Crown property to ensure nothing else is missing or improperly located. We also need to review our protocols to understand how this breach occurred and prevent future incidents. Sir Reginald nodded approvingly. Excellent suggestions, Captain Morrison. I want a full security audit completed within the week. Lord Hamilton, you'll coordinate with Captain Morrison on that. Of course, Lord Hamilton agreed. The discussion continued for another hour, covering various aspects of the situation. There was talk of whether this matter needed to be reported to the police, given that it involved valuable property and potential criminal violations. Dame Elizabeth argued that keeping the matter internal would be preferable for the monarchy's reputation, while others felt that transparency and proper legal process were more important. Finally, Sir Reginald made a decision. I will brief His Majesty the King when he returns tomorrow. This is ultimately a matter that requires his judgment. In the meantime, the items in question have been returned to the Jewel House Secure Vault. Your Majesty, I must ask that you provide a written statement detailing exactly when and how you acquired these items and what your intentions were in transporting them. Camilla nodded wearily. I'll provide whatever documentation you require. Additionally, Sir Reginald continued, until this matter is fully resolved, I'm afraid I must implement certain restrictions. You will not have access to the Jewel House or to any Crown property without explicit written authorization from both myself and His Majesty. A senior aide will accompany you at any official functions where you might wear items from the collection. These restrictions are not punitive, but protective, to ensure clarity and proper procedure moving forward. The Queen's face flushed with humiliation. Being placed under essentially supervised access to royal property was a significant blow to her dignity and status. But she recognized that she had little room to argue given the circumstances. I understand, she said quietly. As the meeting concluded and officials began to file out, Morrison caught Sir Reginald's eye. The Lord Chamberlain gestured for him to remain behind. Once the room had cleared except for the two of them, Sir Reginald spoke candidly. Captain Morrison, you handled a very difficult situation with professionalism and integrity. You followed your protocols despite significant pressure, and you undoubtedly prevented what could have been an even more serious incident. Morrison nodded. Thank you, sir. I was simply doing my duty, though I take no pleasure in the outcome. Nor should you, Sir Reginald agreed. This is a sad situation all around. However, you should be aware that there may be repercussions for you personally. Her Majesty may hold a grudge, and there are those who will see you as having embarrassed the royal family. I understand, sir, but I couldn't have acted differently. The protocols exist for important reasons, and they must apply to everyone equally. Spoken like a man of true principle. I want you to know that you have my full support. I will make sure His Majesty understands that you acted correctly and courageously. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. Morrison felt a wave of relief. He had been worried about potential professional consequences, but having the Lord Chamberlain's backing was significant. I appreciate that greatly, sir. As Morrison left the blue drawing room and made his way back through the palace corridors, he reflected on the extraordinary morning. He had begun his day expecting routine security duties, never imagining he would end up at the center of a royal crisis. The weight of what had transpired sat heavily on his shoulders, but he knew he had made the right choices. The following morning brought an unusual quiet to Buckingham Palace. Word of the previous day's incident had spread through the staff despite efforts to maintain confidentiality. Servants and officials spoke in hushed tones, speculating about what would happen next. Captain Morrison arrived early for his shift, knowing that the king would be returning from his Commonwealth tour and would need to be briefed immediately. Morrison had spent much of the previous evening writing a detailed report of the incident, ensuring that every fact was accurately documented. He understood that this report might be scrutinized by lawyers, investigators, and historians. The truth needed to be preserved exactly as it had occurred, without embellishment or omission. As he walked through the palace corridors that morning, Morrison noticed something different in how people looked at him. Some staff members offered subtle nods of respect, while others averted their eyes uncomfortably. He had become a controversial figure overnight, praised by some for his integrity, and viewed by others as someone who had embarrassed the royal family. Lord Hamilton had wasted no time beginning his investigation into how the crown jewels had left the secure vault. He had interviewed every member of his staff, reviewed security footage, and examined access logs. By morning, he had discovered something troubling that he immediately reported to Sir Reginald. The investigation revealed that a junior staff member named Thomas Whitmore had indeed removed the items from the vault approximately 3 weeks earlier. However, Whitmore claimed he had been acting on verbal instructions that he believed came from authorized sources. The situation was more complex than initially appeared. Someone had manipulated procedures and perhaps taken advantage of a relatively inexperienced staff member's eagerness to be helpful. When the king arrived at the palace just before noon, he was immediately escorted to a private meeting with Sir Reginald, Lord Hamilton, and Dame Elizabeth. The meeting lasted for nearly 2 hours, during which the king was given a comprehensive briefing on everything that had transpired. His Majesty's reaction was not immediately known to those outside the meeting, but the serious expressions on everyone's faces when they emerged suggested difficult conversations had taken place. Later that afternoon, Morrison was summoned to the king's private study. His heart pounded as he made his way through the familiar corridors. He had protected members of the royal family for years, but had never been in a situation quite like this. The king was seated at his desk when Morrison entered, and he gestured for the captain to sit. "Captain Morrison," the king began, his voice weary but kind. "I've read your report and heard accounts of yesterday's events from several sources. I want to hear directly from you what happened and what you were thinking as the situation unfolded." Morrison took a breath and recounted the events clearly and honestly. He explained his initial concerns when he learned of the Queen's sudden departure plans, his decision to follow standard protocols despite resistance, and his discovery of the crown jewels. He described the difficult confrontation and his unwavering belief that he had to report what he found, regardless of the consequences. The king listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When Morrison finished, His Majesty was silent for a long moment. His fingers steepled under his chin as he considered everything he had heard. "You placed yourself in an extraordinarily difficult position," the king finally said. "You could have looked the other way, avoided conflict, protected your career. Many people would have done exactly that. But you chose to follow your duty and your conscience. That took courage." Morrison felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thank you, Your Majesty. I was simply trying to do what was right, and you succeeded, though I imagine it hasn't felt like success given the turmoil it created." The king paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want you to understand something, Captain. The monarchy is an ancient institution, but it survives because people like you uphold standards and principles even when it's uncomfortable. Without that integrity, we would lose the trust that allows us to exist." "I appreciate your understanding, sir." The king leaned back in his chair. "The Queen Consort and I have had lengthy discussions. She is deeply embarrassed by what occurred and recognizes that her actions were wrong. There were underlying issues, personal insecurities, and pressures that led to poor judgment. That doesn't excuse what happened, but it does provide context." Morrison nodded, understanding that the king was trying to protect his wife's dignity while acknowledging the seriousness of her actions. "We've decided on several courses of action," the king continued. "First, the security audit you recommended will be conducted immediately and thoroughly. Lord Hamilton has already identified gaps in our procedures that allowed this to happen, and those will be addressed. Second, The queen consort has voluntarily agreed to counseling to help her deal with the pressures of her position in healthier ways. And third, there will be additional oversight and accountability measures put in place regarding access to crown property. Those sound like wise measures. Your Majesty, there's also the matter of you, Captain Morrison. You've done nothing wrong, but you've become a complicated figure in this household. Some people, out of misplaced loyalty, may resent what they see as your role in embarrassing Her Majesty. I want to ensure you're protected from any retaliation or uncomfortable situations. Morrison felt a knot form in his stomach. Was he about to be transferred or dismissed despite having acted correctly? The king must have read his expression because he smiled slightly. I'm not removing you from your position, Captain. Quite the opposite. I'm promoting you to Deputy Head of Royal Protection. You'll have broader authority and responsibilities, and you'll report directly to me on all matters of security protocol. I want you to help rebuild trust in our security systems and ensure this kind of breach never happens again. Morrison was stunned. He had expected consequences, but certainly not a promotion. Your Majesty, I'm honored. Thank you for your trust. The honor is mine, Captain. I need people around me who will tell me difficult truths and uphold standards even when it's uncomfortable. That's more valuable than blind loyalty. As Morrison left the king's study, his mind was spinning. The crisis that had seemed like it might end his career had instead led to advancement. But more importantly, the institution he served had chosen integrity over convenience, truth over image. That mattered more than any promotion. In the days that followed, the palace worked to ensure the incident remained confidential. The public would never know how close they had come to a major scandal. The press reported only that Queen Camilla had canceled a planned trip to her country estate due to scheduling conflicts. Nothing more. Lord Hamilton's investigation concluded that young Thomas Whitmore had been manipulated by someone who understood palace procedures well enough to exploit them. However, identifying exactly who had given the initial authorization for removing the jewels proved impossible. The trail went cold, suggesting someone with knowledge of how to cover their tracks. Whether it had been the Queen herself through intermediaries or someone else with their own agenda remained unclear. Queen Camilla maintained a lower profile in the weeks following the incident. She attended her required official functions, but seemed more subdued, less confident than before. Those close to her said she was genuinely shaken by what had occurred and was working hard to rebuild trust within the household. Her relationship with Captain Morrison remained professionally distant. They encountered each other occasionally in the course of their duties, exchanging polite nods, but little else. Margaret, the Queen's assistant, privately apologized to Morrison for putting him in such a difficult position. She admitted she had suspected something was wrong that morning, but hadn't known how to handle it. Morrison assured her that she had done nothing wrong and that the situation had been unprecedented for everyone involved. The security audit that Morrison helped conduct revealed several other vulnerabilities in palace procedures. Over the following months, comprehensive reforms were implemented. New tracking systems for crown property were installed. Access protocols were tightened, and additional training was provided to all staff members about security procedures and their importance. Lord Hamilton retired from his position 6 months later, citing health reasons. Though many suspected the stress of the incident had contributed to his decision, his replacement was a younger, more technology-focused administrator who implemented additional digital safeguards and modern security measures while respecting the traditions that made the Jewel House special. For Captain Morrison, life gradually returned to a new normal. His promotion brought increased responsibilities, but also greater ability to shape security policies. He worked closely with Sir Reginald to develop protocols that balanced the need for security with the practical realities of royal life. It was a delicate balance, but one he was uniquely qualified to navigate, given what he had experienced. One evening, several months after the incident, Morrison was conducting a routine security review when he received an unexpected message. Queen Camilla had requested a private meeting with him. He felt apprehensive as he made his way to her sitting room, uncertain what to expect. The Queen was alone when he arrived, dressed casually and looking more relaxed than he had seen her in months. She invited him to sit and offered tea, which he politely accepted. For a moment they sat in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Camilla spoke. Captain Morrison, I've wanted to have this conversation for some time but wasn't certain how to begin. I owe you an apology. Morrison started to protest, but she held up a hand. Please, let me finish. When you stopped my departure that morning, I was angry and frightened. I felt humiliated and blamed you for exposing my mistakes. But I've had time to reflect, and I understand now that you were doing exactly what needed to be done. You were protecting the institution, protecting those treasures, and in a way, protecting me from making an even bigger mistake. Your Majesty, I never wanted to cause you distress. I was simply following my duty. I know that now, Camilla said softly, and I want you to know that I respect what you did, even though it was difficult for both of us. The pressures of this life, the constant scrutiny, the feeling that you're never quite good enough, it can make you do foolish things. But that doesn't excuse my actions, and it doesn't diminish the courage it took for you to stand firm that morning. Morrison felt deeply moved by her words. Thank you, Your Majesty. That means a great deal to me. I also want you to know that I support your promotion fully. The king made the right choice. We need people with integrity in positions of authority. People who will do the right thing even when it's hard. They've talked for nearly an hour. A genuine conversation between two people who had been forced into opposition but had found mutual respect through the ordeal. When Morrison left her sitting room that evening, he felt that a weight had been lifted. The incident would never be forgotten, but it could be put into proper perspective as a learning experience for everyone involved. Years later, when Morrison finally retired from royal service, the incident at Buckingham Palace had become something of a legend within security circles. It was taught as a case study in how to handle difficult situations with integrity. Morrison himself rarely spoke about it publicly, preferring to let his actions speak for themselves. The ornate wooden box that had contained the crown jewels that fateful morning was eventually placed in a secure archive. Its role in the incident documented for future historians. The jewels themselves continued to be used for official occasions, their beauty and historical significance unchanged by the drama that had briefly surrounded them. For Queen Camilla, the incident became a turning point. She emerged from it with greater humility and a better understanding of the responsibilities that came with her position. She became more involved in charitable work and built stronger relationships with palace staff, treating them with increased respect and appreciation. The monarchy itself emerged stronger from the crisis, having demonstrated that no one, regardless of position, was above accountability. The reforms implemented in the wake of the incident created more robust safeguards that protected both the institution and the individuals within it. Captain James Morrison, the guard who had prevented a queen's departure and uncovered a potential scandal, continued to serve with distinction. He remained the kind of person who would always choose duty over convenience, truth over comfort, and integrity over personal advancement. In the end, that was exactly the kind of person the monarchy needed, and exactly the kind of person who kept ancient institutions relevant in the modern world. The story of that morning, when a royal guard stood firm against pressure and did his duty, became a reminder that courage sometimes looks like simply following the rules, even when everyone wants you to look the other way. It was a lesson that resonated far beyond the palace walls, teaching that integrity matters most when it costs you something, and that doing the right thing, though difficult in the moment, is ultimately always worth the price.